Impact Leadership by Omdena is a series supporting and promoting thoughtful and sustainable leadership with a focus on building solutions to solve some of the most pressing problems of the world. In Impact Leadership by Omdena, we bring together the civic society world and the tech world to discuss and create the impact for a better future. Rudrada Mitra, CEO of Omdena, is the host of the series. Subscribe to our Impact Leadership newsletter on Omdena's website to be notified about new pieces of meaningful content.
Welcome to the first episode of Omdena Impact Leadership Podcast. Today, we are honored to have His Excellency Tshering Tobgay, former Prime Minister of Bhutan. He has been a great ambassador for his country, and millions of people have heard his talks on sustainability, global warming, and happiness. Welcome, sir, and thank you for giving your time.
Thank you for having me on your show. Delighted to meet you again.
So let's start with your journey. I read that both of your parents were part of developing the Bhutan. You did your schooling in Kalimpong and got scholarship from the United Nations to do your bachelor's in the US. And after returning back, you started as a civil servant and afterwards co-founded the first political party of Bhutan. I also went through some of your TED Talks and I was deeply impressed with what you had to say about global warming, happiness, and carbon index. I would love to hear a bit more about how your journey till now helped you shape your ideas and views of these different topics.
Well, my journey has been very simple. I've had the good fortune of being born in Bhutan, growing up in Bhutan. Yes, I've had the good fortune of studying in India and Bhutan and in the United States of America. But most importantly, I've had the good fortune of serving my career as a public servant in Bhutan. And having grown up in Bhutan, where gross national happiness, we believe in the development philosophy of gross national happiness. If anything has shaped my views in a constructive manner on how I relate to the environment and social progress and government, culture, equity and sustainable economic growth, it is because of the philosophy, the development philosophy of gross national happiness and nothing else. It's not because of my own doing, certainly.
Yeah, thanks for bringing this up actually about the gross national happiness. And you mentioning about Bhutan. I have heard you speaking about Bhutan and the way you described Bhutan is a small country tucked away in the Himalayas, sandwiched between two largest countries of the world, India and China. But the way I see is Bhutan is a country that has exported the idea of gross national happiness way back in 1972 and termed it more important than gross domestic product. It gives free education for all, it has free healthcare, and the villages get free electricity at almost no cost. It's also the only country in the world which is carbon neutral and in fact it's carbon negative, where the constitution mandates 60% of the country be under forest. So bringing all of those background, what I would like to understand is what makes Bhutan such an extraordinary country, which is so unique in the world, and why does it focus so much on the gross national happiness?
To put it very simply, it's leadership, enlightened leadership in the form of our kings. So gross national happiness you mentioned in 1972, when it was slightly later, when His Majesty the Fourth King, he pronounced that for Bhutan, gross national happiness is more important than gross national product. And he said it because some international journalists asked him about Bhutan's economy and gross national product. So he told them that for Bhutan, gross national happiness, for Bhutan, gross national happiness is more important than gross national product. And so while we started understanding and celebrating the ideals and principles of gross national happiness, implementing those principles and enjoying some of the rewards, we certainly didn't really export the idea of gross national happiness. I hope we still don't. We need to be true to ourselves. We have a lot of challenges. We need to address those challenges, and we need to implement principles of gross national happiness more sincerely. If the world sees what you are doing and takes a bit of inspiration, maybe in the form of a unique case study, I think that's very good. Having said that, we're doing our interview today very auspiciously on the 11th of November, because the 11th of November, i.e. today, is His Majesty the Fourth King's birthday anniversary. He turns 67 today. So he first promulgated the idea of gross national happiness when he was a teenager. Today he's 67. And today in Bhutan is also celebrated as Gross National Happiness Day. Gross national happiness in particular and happiness in general were discussed in the UN about 13 years ago. And the UN adopted 20th of March as World Happiness Day. But the background to that is a lot of idea sharing, discussions on happiness in general, alternate forms of government, and then also, in particular, gross national happiness. So what makes Bhutan unique is, like I said, in one word, leadership. Leadership that is enlightened leadership in the form of our kings, specifically the fourth king, who is the architect of gross national happiness. That said, happiness has always been an important consideration in Bhutan. 400 years ago, the founding father of Bhutan, Shangri-La, 400 years ago, in the 1600s, he said that if a government cannot provide happiness for its people, that government has no right to exist. Put differently, or put subtly, that the main purpose of government is to ensure the happiness and well-being of their citizens. But he put it more bluntly, if the government cannot provide happiness for its citizens, that government does not have any right to exist. So this was 400 years ago. Then in the 1970s, our fourth king promoted the idea of gross national happiness based on 4 pillars: sustainable and equitable socio-economic growth. So this takes care of our economy that must be sustainable, but it also must be equitable, and social growth is important. And then there's preservation of culture, protection of our environment, and most importantly, good governance. Because without good governance, none of the rest is possible. So His Majesty the Fourth King turns 7 today. He abdicated from the throne when he was 51. When he was 51, in 2006, he abdicated from the throne. He stepped down from the throne in favor of his crown prince, our king, His Majesty Jigme Singye Wangchuck, who has taken the mantle of King of Bhutan and continue to guide us and ensure that we are faithful to the principles of gross national happiness. So we've been very, very fortunate.
Thanks a lot. First of all, I didn't know that today is a Gross National Happiness Day. It's perhaps just a coincidence, but really a great coincidence. And what you said about the leadership of Bhutan, absolutely. I hope that many leaders in the world can take lessons from that. Coming to the point of the happiness, let's go a bit deeper into that one topic. It's before we go into the good governance part also. Bhutan is also ranked 95 in the World Happiness Index. And I was reading that the understanding of happiness in Bhutan is much broader than the understanding of happiness in the West. For example, during the calculation of the happiness, you ask questions like, do you meditate? How much time you devote to your community? How much you sleep? How often you quarrel with your family? Now, it's very important to understand what are the relevance of these metrics in happiness and why is it somehow different than how Western happiness index is?
Well, we must first ask ourselves, what is happiness? It depends on what we mean by happiness. Is it something that's hedonistic? Is it something that's immediate? Is it just joy? Is it a dopamine hit? What is happiness? Or is it long-term sustainable happiness? I think of it as more like overall well-being of a person. I think of it as contentment. To be content with life, to be content with what you have, to be content with what you see is there in the future. To me, that is happiness. The other aspect of, in terms of the global index, 95, Bhutan ranked 95, it's not a surprise. Bhutan has one of the smallest GDPs in the world. And in these international rankings, GDP and per capita GDP figure significantly. The levels of education, healthcare figure significantly. And obviously, advanced nations, rich nations are going to rank happier by those measurements. And which leads very nicely to your question as to why do we measure the amount we sleep, whether we meditate, whether we engage with the community or not, whether we make donations or not, the mental health of a person. So these things, why do we ask these questions? Questions when we are implementing the Gross National Happiness Index, GNHI survey. Now the survey is based on 9 domains. These 9 domains are the conditions of happiness. So these 9 domains are living standard, health and education. Everybody knows that living standard is important, health is important, education is important. And this is what most of the Western happiness indexes also measure. But then we also have environment and then good governance. What is the state of the environment? And what is the state of the governance? Do people trust the government? Do people enjoy the level of public services that they expect? What is the level of pollution in the country? Do we have forests? Governance and environment. Again, there, most countries have accepted that this is important. Most governments accept that this is important. These two are also important. The happiness index does not do enough justice into measuring those two. And then the final 4 domains, the psychological well-being. Have you been depressed? Do you have suicidal tendencies? Have you thought about suicide? Do you meditate? And then time use. How much are you sleeping? How much time do you spend with your family? How much are you working? Community vitality. Do you live in an extended family? Do you take care of your family? Do you engage with the community? And then cultural vitality, cultural diversity. Do you enjoy a diverse culture? Does that form a core part of how does that shape your values and beliefs and identity? So these 4 domains, psychological well-being, time use, cultural vitality, and cultural diversity, and community vitality. These 4 domains are not measured in any happiness index. For us, these 9 domains, again, living standard, health, education, environment, governance, psychological well-being, time use, culture, and community. These 9 domains, according to us, are the conditions of happiness. If you enjoy a certain level of satisfaction across these domains, you should be generally happy with life, content with life. Whereas you may have very high living standards and very high education, very high levels of healthcare also. But if your environment is polluted, or if your government is absolutely corrupt, or you suffer, then obviously, according to our measurement, you're not going to come out far ahead. Whereas by other measurements, by some international measurements, you actually might be deemed to be very happy. So that's the reason we calculate even the number of hours you sleep, the number of hours you work, the amount of money you make, the amount of assets you earn, whether you are content in the workplace, whether you feel a sense of purpose in your work, whether you feel safe in your work, whether you are satisfied with government services. So all of this, there are 149 questions, by the way.
I loved your answer, and specifically talking about the content with life. And I always think that the peace is the highest level of emotion that one should try to achieve.
You are listening to Impact Leadership by Omdena, where we bring together the civic society world and the tech world to discuss and create the impact for a better future. Subscribe to our Impact Leadership newsletter on Omdena's website to be notified about new pieces of meaningful content.
Now, let's move ahead to the good governance part. So not only that Bhutan government calculates the GNH, it actually has a GNH commission, which helps in policy making. And in fact, we have seen that Bhutan has also developed rapidly economically. Since 1980s, it has annual growth of 7.5%. And the poverty has gone down from 37% to 10% in the last 10 to 12 years. So that brings to an interesting question that I think a lot of people struggle is how do you combine economic growth with maintaining the GNH? Specifically as people's attitude is changing with new technologies that's coming in their lives.
It depends what you want from your economic growth. You must have a purpose to economic growth. So unless you can answer that, you don't know why you're growing economically. If the purpose of economic growth is to spread income and welfare among society, obviously that's going to be a different type of economic growth. If you want economic growth, but you don't want to compromise the integrity of your culture or the environment, obviously it's going to be a little different. But if you just want economic growth for the sake of economic growth, I do believe that no country would want such a situation. You're going to end up with economic growth that's totally unregulated and all the money in the hands of a few. And so it's not about how you balance. I think you can balance. It's about how you prioritize what is important. Is the happiness and well-being of all the people important? If it is, you can have both economic growth and social progress. You can have economic growth and you can provide free education to all your citizens. I do believe that most countries have enough wealth to provide free healthcare to all its citizens. Every country is providing healthcare. And the economic machine works in very convoluted ways, complicated ways to provide the service that's called healthcare. I think it can be simplified. I think that everybody can just receive free healthcare. It depends on what you want. It depends what you think is important for the people. Is it a responsibility for the people to educate your children, to give yourself good healthcare? Well, then in that case, the type of economic model you create is quite different. But if you say this is the responsibility, a collective responsibility to provide free healthcare and free education and to look after the environment, that this is a collective responsibility, then you will have a different economic model.
And specifically now coming to the point of the economic growth where businesses actually also play a big role. And I remember when I met you in Riyadh, we were talking about GNH, that Bhutan not only has built the GNH for the country, but also for the businesses. Can you elaborate on how do you calculate the GNH for business?
We have these 9 domains that are the conditions of happiness, the 9 domains of GNH, which the Center for Bhutan Studies measures every 5 years. We still haven't had the last measurement, which was supposed to have taken 2 years ago in the middle of COVID. And it would have been wonderful to actually have the measurement in the middle of the pandemic. However, because of the nature of the pandemic, we couldn't conduct the survey also. And so the last survey, we need to conduct it. The survey provides a snapshot, a lot of information, but ultimately it provides a snapshot of the people. Are people happy or not? How much are people working? Are men working more than women? In this case, women are working more than men. Are we sleeping on average sufficiently? It looks like we are sleeping fairly well, more than 8 hours a night on average. Are the farmers happy? And it looks like they are not as happy as people in the cities. Women, the rate of happiness for women has increased more than men. But overall, men are still happier than women. So there's a whole lot of information that you get. But ultimately, at that moment, it provides a picture of where the country is. It's just like measuring the GDP, which provides a picture of the economy. So here, it provides a picture of the happiness and well-being of the entire country. I thought that if we could extend that to businesses, individual businesses. So we have the same 9 domains, and these 9 domains are used to capture the picture of a company. And this is just being piloted right now in Bhutan and in a few other countries, including Italy, Germany, and Brazil, but mainly in Bhutan. They're just being piloted. But unlike the GNH index at a national level, for companies, the GNH certification for companies, for businesses, there the 9 domains are divided into 2 parts. One is the organizational commitment to happiness, organizational commitment to GNH. So environment, governance, culture, and community. That is what the organization, the management provides this information. And then the individuals will provide information for living standard, health, education, psychological well-being, and time use. So you have two sets of data being generated, which is then analyzed to provide a snapshot of the business in terms of G&H at that particular moment. And this is quite complicated because you really need to take time to interview the workers, to get honest information from management. But I think at the time it is worth it because it provides management a host of tools to make decisions on for the future. You have some concrete data on what you're doing about sustainability. You have some concrete data about how transparent governance is, or whether your workers feel safe in the workplace, about how healthy your workers are, how stressed they are mentally and physically they are at the workplace. And of course, whether they are learning on the job, or what's their education levels, whether they trust one another, do they earn more assets, so on and so forth. This basically is nothing but what the business world seems to see as ESG, environment, social, and governance. So ESG, whereas ESG has been facing a lot of difficulty as to how you define ESG and then how you measure ESG. We don't seem to agree on this. And then how you use the measurement. Whereas with G&H for G&H index, G&H certification for businesses, we have a template for us on measuring G&H for business. We have a strategy on how we can improve on those measurements for our own businesses. But this is for Bhutan.
Yeah, I mean, when I heard about what you were talking about G&H and using that as an index, I think that's absolutely completely makes sense to go forward for businesses around the world. But you also mentioned about the complication of calculating the G&H. In fact, I read that on an average, even at the people level, it takes around 3 hours to make that interview and calculate that G&H. That brings to the point that what I know more about the AI and technology field. And this is something that we had also discussed, that how can we use actually AI to calculate this G&H, or at least some of those map parameters? Can we, in fact, use AI to rate businesses around the world, globally, how well they are performing in G&H? So my question next is a bit broader in terms of the AI overall. How do you see potentially AI can be used, not only in the G&H, but in Bhutan overall? And where do you see our potential opportunities of that technology in Bhutan?
So we are at the cusp of using the potential of AI in a very productive way. It's up to us, the way we use it, the way we use AI, to harness the powers of AI as we go forward. Let me backtrack. So 300 years ago, we had this industrial revolution. And then the new economy, the modern economy was born. And the modern economy, the measurement for the modern economy is just GDP. And everything that goes into GDP, nothing else was considered. The wealth of the people, the well-being of the people, even to the extent the amount of, while GDP calculates the amount of work provided, the work provided by women in their homes are not included. If people are suffering because of disease and war, that is not calculated in the GDP as a negative, as a liability. In fact, because it expands the health industry or the defense industry, it adds to the GDP. It doesn't make sense. There could be a growing divide among the rich and the poor, and the bigger the divide, the less happy the people are going to be at the poor. But that is not calculated in GDP at all, considered. It's just that as long as the country generates more wealth, regardless of how that wealth is generated, you have a positive GDP and a growing GDP. I mentioned this because we could have, and we still can, measure other things. Overall well-being of people, the health of the planet, the health of our natural environment, the health of our respective cultures. I think they are important on the overall economy also. And we don't calculate the wealth of our forests, and that does not feature into GDP. And so, with artificial intelligence, we have an opportunity now to harness the powers of the artificial intelligence and to guide it into a more wholesome sort of a way. Right now, everything about the AI is about economy. Everything is about the economy. Whether it's autonomous driving cars, whether it's manufacturing cars, robots manufacturing cars, or whether it is algorithms that help me shop, or social media, or virtual shop assistants, everything seems to be on how to improve GDP. We are harnessing AI to further strengthen and to expand GDP, not to create happiness and well-being of the people. Even when it comes to defense, we use AI a lot in the defense industries. But I would argue again there, the more of it you use in the defense industry, it is bottom line ultimately to expand the economy. So the question is, can we use AI? Should we use AI? Or rather, shouldn't we use AI to counter the weaknesses of GDP?
So I can't agree more than what you mentioned, that the whole focus of AI is how do you expand GDP? And one example that you gave, that sick people expands healthcare. I can't agree more than that. We need to change how we look at the society. And I think people are changing. When we met in Riyadh, we discussed not only the idea of kind of promoting the GNH, can we start using AI, engage the global community that Omdena has access to, and rate businesses and see and show to the world that, look, this is what is missing, or this is how the businesses are performing, but also potentially starting a conference around AI and happiness where Bhutan can play a pivotal role for spreading the ideas that you discussed today. Where do you see going forward from here onwards in promoting these ideas globally across the world, using technology and AI and happiness and promoting and the businesses, all that what we discussed, that kind of spreading this thing out, that now we have an opportunity to actually leverage AI to make it global potentially, that we don't need to go individually and do a survey necessarily.
So I think gross national happiness, I think that it is the responsibility of Bhutan, our responsibility to share our experiences with the world. As indeed, it'll be lovely to learn from you and to hear about your experiences. That said, obviously, we can't preach to the world because every culture, every society, they have their own unique context. However, we can be a case study. And if we can inspire to think about models other than just GDP, then maybe there is place for such a conversation. In terms of AI and using AI to measure gross national happiness, I see a lot of potential. If you want to measure the psychological well-being of a person, for instance, in your business, the psychological well-being of a person, I think AI can actually provide some clues without even anybody having to answer question. The number of days you are ill, your overall physical well-being, that's very easy for AI, right? The question of how the information will be collected, how it will be used, that's an entirely different conversation. But in terms of collecting the right information, I think it's more accurate. If you ask me in the last 6 months how many days I was ill, I'm just going to give you a ballpark figure. Maybe 2 days. I really felt under the weather and I stayed home. But if I were to use AI, you are going to have exact information over the last 6 months. And similarly, how many hours at night I sleep. If you ask me that question, I'll probably think if I slept well last night and the night before, I'm probably going to give you a biased answer. But AI can really get at true answers without biases. Similarly, with even material possessions, what you have, what you're buying, and then what you're doing for the environment, your understanding for the environment. I think AI can produce a wealth of knowledge, information. And I think you can measure happiness, measure GNH or ESG using AI, whether a person feels secure in the workplace. Again, AI can provide a wealth of information on that, whether the workplace is secure, whether people trust their management and the board of directors. I think in all these areas, these are fairly simple tasks for machines to calculate. The question is, how are you going to use that information in a manner that is constructive, but truly constructive and enlightened?
I know we are running out of time. I could talk to you for another half an hour, but that's not the time we have for today. So let's take some of the ideas that you shared in today forward. And the purpose of this impact leadership is not just to talk, but actually take it forward in concrete actions, engage the global community. I plan to come to Bhutan in January. I hope I will have the opportunity to meet with you and talk about some of the things that we discussed today, take it forward, and how could we start implementing these things going forward. So once again, thanks a lot, His Excellency Tshering Tobgay, for your time. It was a pleasure. And anything that you'd like to say finally?
Well, just one thing. Thank you very much, my friend. And stay in touch. I look forward to receiving you in January in my country. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you for listening to Impact Leadership by Omdena. Our mission is to support and promote thoughtful and sustainable leadership with a focus on building solutions to solve some of the most pressing problems of the world. Do not forget to subscribe to our Impact Leadership newsletter on Omdena's website to be notified about new pieces of meaningful content.